Okay, ladies and gentlemen, time to settle down, please. I was just talking to our next speaker, Ross Sleight, about how it seems a little bit odd to go from the crisis in Western liberal democracy to better use of smartphones and front covers in media. But that is why we're here. That was a great panel session. And our next two speakers are really, really interesting. They feed into everything that we've heard in the last couple of days. It's all about where are consumers going, what does the future look like for us as citizens, and how does media tap into that behaviour? How do media brand owners work with that and prosper in this new environment in which we're all living? So in a few minutes we're going to have Josh Macht from Harvard Business Review in the US. But first, to talk to us about the consumer of the future, please welcome the Chief Strategy Officer of Somo in the UK, Ross Sleight.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. So in the next sort of 15 minutes or so, I want to talk to you a little bit about some insights that we've seen around how consumers are changing, how their behavior is changing, and really the whole reason for this has come down to the smartphone. It's only been a decade since the smartphone's been around. In fact, I'd argue that actually it's only been 9 years, because that was when the iPhone 3G was out, and that allowed people to really start connecting on the move. But fundamentally, during this time, people's behavior has changed beyond all measures that we've had beforehand. We are now really addicted to our phones. This is the type of usage you see on smartphones. And this is probably the last set of big stats that I'm going to try and give you today. But the point here is that you've got average users talking and interacting with their smartphones on average of 2.5 hours a day, right? That's 2,617 swipes and pinches and zooms and likes going through there. And if you're a heavy user, you're up to 3.5 hours a day, 3.75 hours a day, with over 5,000 interactions with your phone. This is the home in people's pockets. This is what's changing. And in that change, there is a definitive difference in how behavior happens. And that's what we've got to have understood. This is not just something that is going to go away. Already we are at a point where there are 2.5 billion smartphones globally. Right? That's almost where we reach TV penetration globally. In 2020, it is estimated that we will reach 5 billion smartphones. So this is something you have to begin to embrace, because consumers are leading the way forward on this. And what I aim to do today is to give you sort of 4 areas that we think are really interesting in behavioral change. The first thing I want to talk about is being mindful to our end customers. And this might sound really strange, because we spend our time in business thinking about how can we make people more engaged, how can we gain their attention. And the point with this now is that smartphones have almost overtaken our lives. This is a new word for me that I've found, smombies, which is smartphone zombies, that we have this way that we shuffle around the whole of life, looking down, interacting, waiting for the next ping to be able to say, oh, I've got a like, I've got a love on that basis. But it's a real major issue for people. Because when people are asked, are they using their smartphone too much, we find that nearly 40% of people feel that the smartphone's taking over their lives. And what's really, really interesting is that that happens amongst the most smartphone-enabled, interconnected group of people, those millennials. 56% of millennials are saying that they believe that they use their smartphones too much. And the very fact that they're thinking they're using their smartphones too much, you're in a position whereby they're wanting to try and change that behavior. They're wanting to take it out of the social interactions, that it's always there looking down, it's there in the middle of dinner, it's there in the middle with friends, it's there controlling their lives. And so 74% of people want to moderate their smartphone usage, but currently only 14% of people are succeeding in doing that. So we're in a situation where we have to be really mindful of what our customers want, because we cannot just expect to keep on bashing them and inundating them with things and expect them to be able to react and to engage. So being mindful of your customers is the very, very first point I want to make. The second thing is that I want us to think about being easier for our customers. And that means being faster, being quicker, being smarter with what we do. Let me give you an example. The average time for a fully loaded mobile page is 22 seconds, yet over half of mobile site visitors will leave a page that takes over 3 seconds to load. Back in 2008, Amazon found that 100 milliseconds of latency in a page delivery, which is, and let's be quite honest, when you blink, that's like 300 milliseconds. 100 milliseconds delay in latency costs them 1% of sales. Speed is absolutely vital. We are not only attention deficit as a series of customers, but we are also very frustrated when things don't get there quicker as we want them to be. And that's why things like accelerated mobile pages, Facebook Instant Articles, all these things where we're stripping out elements of pages and concentrating on the content itself are creating greater engagement. So next time you're sitting down with your commercial team and you're talking about header bidding and you're talking about putting more latency into your page, have a think about how that better serves the customer. And think about the customer first rather than maybe thinking about the monetization. We also all know that there's a sort of apathy, and I say apathy, on the basis that the majority of people don't use hundreds and hundreds of apps. They use 25 during a month, and that 96% of all their time is spent on the top 10 apps. And in fact, the number one app gets nearly 50% of all their time. The top 3 apps get 77% of all their time, right? So we're very seeing a set of consumer behaviors that is starting to corral around the typical suspects, Facebooks and Googles, and what's interesting there on the top 10 in the US is that the blue is owned by Facebook, the red is owned by Google. So there's only 2 players independent of Facebook and Google, and that duopoly in the top 10. But what's interesting for me is that the operating systems are starting to open up. Apple, Android, we all understand that this is changing. And when you look at the opportunities to engage outside of other applications, they're becoming massive. So within operating systems, we have the ability to be able to put widgets on the home page now. We have, obviously, notifications in-app messaging, but we have the ability to write directly into personal assistants. We have the ability to be able to write into the universal systems over running that operating system, so into messaging, into email, into calendars. And then we have the opportunity to be able to spend some time in the apps themselves. So when you're thinking about how do I reach and engage customers and be useful to them, you need to start thinking a little bit more about what are the opportunities outside of just doing something in Facebook. For example, The Skim, which is a millennial-focused email newsletter, launched an app in the US which allows you to be able to take that content and place that into your calendar for upcoming events and entertainment and everything. Really clever, because people are looking at their calendars the whole time, and relevant content placed in that calendar is going to get noticed. The other part about this is that we're moving in how we interface. We've moved from typing to swiping, and it's clear that voice is becoming a real opportunity. Audio, we all know, is really important. 24% of all US internet users have listened to a podcast in the last month. And 20% of all of Google's queries on mobile devices and Android devices are voice searches now. In fact, that goes up to 55% of US millennials using Google Voice every single day for searching. Voice is here. And clever publishers are thinking about their voice and audio strategy now, because there are multiple opportunities now to reach. So, for example, Onet in Poland have an application where you can speak to it and say, Onet czytaj, and that means Onet read, and that will then read you the news story directly to you, in a position whereby if you're commuting, if you're driving, if you're doing something else with your smartphone that won't allow you to actually look at the phone itself, you're in a position to be able to get that read to you. Really clever innovation. And that's going to become even more important as we start to see the proliferation away from the smartphone into things such as speakers in our homes, Google Home, Alexa, in our cars where we spend increasing amounts of time commuting and how smart those will be. Your audio strategy is really important as well to make it easier for customers and simpler. So being easier with customers, being mindful for customers, we think are really important trends. The next one up is being relevant for customers. Now, by relevance, we have to talk about personalization, we have to talk about customization, we have to talk about data. But the big issue is that because there is so much out there, this wealth of information and content coming to us, and Clay Shirky talks, who's a fantastic commentator, Clay Shirky, talks about the fact that it's not about information overload that is the problem, it's about filter failure. That we do not have the right filters to be able to navigate all of this content. And we are not helping by just pushing out, as publishers, more and more content without the filters in place. Because consumers have to become editors themselves. In this world of fake news, of promoted content, we're in a position where consumers, and this is from Reuters' digital news report, say that many active internet users now see themselves as editors, balancing and comparing multiple screens, multiple editorial judgments, and even multiple algorithms. The consumer is having to do the filtering themselves, and we're not helping them by not putting in place filters. I like to think about filters as being a sort of a view towards the horizon, that I would like things that are more relevant to me at that point in time to be closer to me than I would like for all the other things to be further away. That's as simple as that. It's just closer and further away. Bring things which are more relevant to me closer. So if I am looking at, I don't know, cooking content or whatever, and it happens to be that I have told you or you know that, that I'm a vegetarian, bring the vegetarian stuff closer to me, push everything else further away. Don't knock it off the horizon, but just push it further away from people. Allow people to be filtered. And we talk a lot about how that might happen. It's about profiles and understanding who the user is, their behavior, their context, where they are, their location, and about doing that for customization and for personalization reasons. So allowing you to explicitly as a user to customize versus you to, as a business, to infer and personalize to somebody. And some examples of that, I mean, I think we all agree Quartz does a fantastic job in looking at how user interfaces will change. Their app, which is effectively a linear app, which takes you through different news stories, so I can't go off and look at different news stories here, there, and everywhere. I'm put down a path, allows me to skim along the top of it or to go in a little bit more little bit more deeper, and it also allows me to customize directly off the back of that as well. It's providing me with filters. It allows me to be able to see what is more interesting to me, and of course that data is flowing back to Quartz. Revel's a great example in the UK of an entertainment guide that is filtering through the massive amount of entertainment and opportunities out there and personalizing this directly to me. Jinrin Xiao, which is an amazing phenomena in China, uses machine learning across 4,000 different sources in order to be able to drive personalization for news readers. And they are looking at 80 million daily active users, well over an hour's worth of engagement. So we can do this from a data-driven perspective, or we can do this from an editorial, curatorial perspective. But we have to start providing filters for people to make things more relevant. The last part I want to talk about in terms of consumer behavior is being wow. And this is really important because consumers love the ability to be able to be first, to be wowed, to be introduced to completely new experiences, because we get bored of the same old things time after time. I'll just talk from a technology perspective, which is what we do mostly at Somo, and looking at how technology affects consumer behavior. Augmented reality is undoubtedly one of the key drivers that we will start to see. It's been around since 2011, but only been opened up in the past couple of months through Apple's and Google's AR kits. This is Quartz in their application putting in an augmented reality opportunity for you to be able to take, in this case, the Cassini spacecraft before it goes and plunges into Saturn's fiery rings and allow you to be able to see that in full augmented reality in front of you in your physical space. Quartz are seeing somewhere in a region of 2/3 of people who have the opportunity to interact with the AR in their app actually interact with it. So it's clear that there is an opportunity there. And this is going out across the world, across all these different platforms. This is Snapchat's platform for art, which is launched by Jeff Koons a couple of weeks ago, which allows you to go and see augmented reality versions of Jeff Koons sculptures in physical spaces. And then, of course, we've got virtual reality as well. Just this last weekend, The Guardian in the UK gave away 97,000 Google Cardboards following the New York Times, 1 million plus cardboards that it gave out to go and promote its virtual reality, its immersive narratives that it's trying to look at. These are the wow factors that can distinguish and differentiate an offering directly through to your customers. So that's what I really wanted to talk about today, these 4 areas. Being mindful to our customers' time and attention, and not just pushing things out to them, because they are trying to temper what they do. Be easier, faster, quicker, smarter in the way that we deliver content, both in terms of the type of content, in terms of how we react to things like voice, but also in terms of how we might be able to look at integrating with other aspects of the operating system that we have in our pocket and creating new opportunities for engagement, such as calendars and maps and so on. Being relevant for people, personalizing and curating for customers, creating the filters that are so deficient out there today. And finally, about being wow with them, taking the opportunities with technology to explore and innovate, to make people just go, wow. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much indeed. And I think we've got some time for questions.
Thank you very much, Ross. So if you have a question from the floor, raise your hand and prepare your catching skills. I'll just scan usual format. You just put your hand up and give us your name and organization. So Ross, can I start? You gave us a couple of examples of what people are doing, The Guardian, for example. But on the whole, is your perception that media companies get this, or that this is something that they really need to embrace and we just aren't there yet?
I think there is a broad spectrum from black to white on that, basically. There are clearly companies which have set up in the recent history, Quartz, Atlantic, people who Vox, Vice, who are starting to, with a clean slate, no legacy.
Yeah.
And then there are companies which are desperately transforming, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, desperately transforming and trying to interact with their customers in a different way. The problem comes down to legacy. What do you have? It's not just legacy technology, it's legacy in terms of how you operate as a business. All businesses are going through a massive form of transformation, which is not just about technology, it's also about the processes you have in place and the people and culture you have in place. And that's why, when you look back to what the New York Times have done, it's all about changing the processes and the culture, with the technology being the icing on the cake for that. And unless you address those 2 areas of what processes, how does my newsroom work, how do my journalists work, and also the culture of digital is now going to be our first and foremost channel, and by digital, of course, I mean mobile, because that is 90% of everything that is on digital now, then you're not going to be in a position to be able to move quick enough. And everyone struggles to move quickly. Let's be very clear. Everyone struggles to move quickly. Technology is growing at exponential rates, and we're in a position whereby we have to react to that, and it's the consumers who choose what they're going to interact with and what they're not going to interact with. We can no longer dictate.
Thank you. So we all need to speed up our thinking and speed up our pace of adaptation to this new world.
Absolutely.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Ross Sleight. Thank you.